Okay, so hi everyone, welcome back to our second part of the Treasure Island, this podcast with our four guests from the University of Liverpool. Last time we talked about students' lightbulb moment, and today we will be discussing how we might preserve and sustain these moments in the current situation as we prepare for the autumn semester in a likelihood of socially distanced campus. And just to remind people from our last discussion, can you briefly just introduce your name, your discipline, and what items you have suggested to take to your treasure island with the students?
So I'll go first. So Stuart Wilkes-Haig from the Department of Politics, and I've decided to take my homemade swingometer, which is essentially a chalkboard with a white arrow that I can move into different positions. Great,
thanks, Stuart.
I'm Anna O'Connor from Orthoptics, and I decided I wanted to take some eye animations and a model eyeball so I can show different aspects, movements.
My name's James Gaynor from the Department of Chemistry. I will take a chemistry lab.
And no doubt within James's chemistry lab there would be what I'm taking, which is a very large whiteboard with infinite supply of marker pens in lots of different colours.
Excellent. So I think you talked about teaching props, and we also talked about before about spaces we create for students to learn and different strategies. Last time you talked about active learning, enabling students to look at things from different perspectives, making learning fun and exciting and engaging. So can I ask you now to consider how, and based on your light bulb moments as well that you discussed last time, of how you might take some of those ideas, how might next semester look like for you in the situation. So I'm just opening up the discussion. Please feel free to talk to each other as well and ask questions, or perhaps argue with each other of what's important, what's not important, and what things you consider, what are the challenges that we are facing and you're all facing, or the students might be facing. So yes, I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I'm happy to carry on going first if nobody else minds. So I ran a big first year module on British politics, and we had to shift online, as we know, and I did quite a lot of things to try and facilitate the online learning this semester, really sort of heavily scaffolding really the content that I was putting online and so on. And I've run a module evaluation, even though they were cancelled in most schools, just to see how the students felt about it and how it compared to last year. And overall, they're very happy. But what they clearly missed was some form of real engagement, some way of really talking about the subject material. So what I'd really like, if we just have 1 hour a week with the students, I can see all of the kind of benefits and virtues to a lot of online content, but I'd really like to use those times to really bring them in and really allow them to talk about what their learning journey is, what their progress is, what they're finding works for them, what they're struggling with, and to just spin off from that and talk about whatever they want to about the material, really, to really provide that engagement. So in some ways it would be a kind of extension of the radio show, but it wouldn't be a live broadcast and so on. But it would be a lot more free form. All of the online stuff very, very heavily structured. But those classroom sessions really quite open and liberal and much more of an exchange of experience and ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what about the others? Have you had similar experiences as Stuart?
Well, we keep talking about this engagement and interaction, and I think by putting a lot of content online, that's the key thing we're missing, and it's trying to replicate that. And we talked previously about sort of sessions being run synchronously or asynchronously, and the need for both. I think because what Stuart's just describing is having at least sort of some aspect of face-to-face online. And I think it's just that engagement and ensuring, just giving the opportunity. That's the challenge, I think. A lot of the content exists already for the online material. and like we've got all the animations that but we used to use computer labs. How are we going to then, so then one of us would be there in person going, well, why have you pressed that? What happens there? And they can ask questions, and they can do it themselves. Or it's just that, how do we ensure that support is provided online? And I think that's sort of the biggest challenge we're all facing. I don't think I've got lots of answers. I think having that opportunity, and I think what Stuart's just said, having a weekly, catch up, a session, so at least you're going, look, we're here, talk to us, please. What don't you understand? What can we want to help? How can we help you? Because I did actually have a session a few weeks ago, and some of the students have been hesitant to put the webcams on, and I said, please put your cameras on. And I could see them sitting there going, pulling that face, the kind of, I'm really not getting this. So the words, it was the non-verbal. I needed that, and I'm going, you're just not getting this, are you? Right, let's go back to basics. And afterwards, like, they had a light bulb moment, but I wouldn't have gone back over that if all I got was their audio. So I don't know how others feel about sort of the online content and the delivery. I'm just interested to hear other people's perspectives.
I think what's clear is that online synchronous sessions are there for different things from what perhaps we use being in the same space as students with normally are for. So the point about, as you say, about being in the same space for them is not necessarily that a lot of teaching is going to go on then, but a lot of communication is going to go on then, which builds up the possibility for students then to talk to each other more effectively, as well as to talk to us more effectively. And we know that some students, for reasons to do with technology or to do with what else is going on in their lives, can't necessarily attend regular synchronous sessions. So a lot of the teaching that needs to take place asynchronously, as it always does. But one of the sessions I attended recently was talking about how, particularly when we're teaching online, we need to make time for kindness, just simply for kindness, for community, for the kind of things that would normally happen in the conversations outside the classroom. We need to make space for those to happen. And so if we can make those fun, and if we can make them about asking questions and about having fun together, which is something that we've already been talking about, then that's an important part of the learning process, even if at the end you can't tick to say this learning outcome was necessarily reached in that session.
Mm. So Diana, how do you think we can make those kindness moments happen? Because one of the things I also miss from the campus, is the lingering behind in meetings has such an important role, even if, I obviously liaise mainly with staff, but just that, before and after events and meetings and teaching sessions, that they have a really important role. This is when students, I guess, can ask questions, can relay insecurities or confirm things. And so it's interesting that you pointed out the kindness. I just wonder how you have you found ways to make that happen online or in other ways?
Well, I mean, the session that I attended emphasized the importance of making space specifically to encourage people to talk about insecurities. But my own experience has been that if you try to do that, even in the normal size seminar group, people aren't comfortable about doing that. Whereas in breakout groups, even when people are with people they don't know very well, as long as they know the breakout group is going to be a fairly short period of time, they tend to be comfortable talking to each other. And we know normally if you ask students to talk about something in groups, that fairly rapidly they will end up talking about what they saw on television last night or the football, whatever they're supposed to be talking about. And normally if you're in the same room as them, then if you catch their eye, then they stop it. But I think in this case, what we need to do is not to give the sense that we're going to intervene, to actually not try to police what people do in breakout groups, and allow those relationships to develop. But then what I do think is important for active learning is that then we build on the relationships of trust that are then developing through that to begin to move towards peer assessed learning and peer assessment, as not peer assisted learning and peer assessment, so that there's much more going on when we're not actually there.
Great. Yeah, I think that they are really important points. I think I've heard other people talk about peer assisted learning as well, that can have a really important academic and social elements as well, and opportunities for that. Don't know, other thoughts on experiences?
From my perspective, whilst I agree with everything, getting students to think, being a kind face for them to talk to, I absolutely agree with that. We're also quite restricted by our accreditation in that our lab skills still need to be done, and I can show someone how to run something called the TLC. I can demonstrate how to do it, but it's not the same as them actually using their hands to manipulate the equipment needed to do it. So whilst I think it was Stuart that said that the face-to-face stuff will be quite free-form and discursive, and online will be more structured. In a way, if we only had to pick one thing, it would be the flip of that for us, really, because we'd want the labs to be more structured. I hope the plan is that we're going to have a bit of both, but the priority has to be the labs. I think just as a hands-on subject, that is the priority for us. But we need to make sure all the other things are there, and we need to make sure that the time in the lab is quality time. If they're in for 6 hours, they're doing things for those 6 hours in a quality way. Some of the other wider thinking that I advocated earlier about critiquing the scripts and things, that can all come beforehand. That doesn't take place in the lab. In the lab is doing the skills that they can't do at home. Is the perspective that we have to take. And I'm sure other practical based subjects would have to take a similar line, I guess, as well.
Well, I can certainly say in health sciences, so in orthodontics, that's we're now planning for, like you say, more of the thinking, more of the really kind of as much as we can in advance of the session. So for maximising that time within our clinical labs. So when they're doing the eye test, they're right. Well, I've already seen the video on this. I've already gone through the step-by-step instructions. I've already done a little quiz online to check my understanding. I've already asked all my questions. I can go in and because we'll have to have potentially less students in one space, socially distancing. So you can't have one member of staff teaching X amount. It'll have to be multiple staff. Again, it's all these sort of the practical implications. You have to maximise that time, face to face. So completely with you on that one.
Yeah. So that's interesting in terms of practice-based and clinical, to some extent, the differences. In terms of your experiences, the last time we talked a little bit about students' experiences and how they, the kind of supports they needed in the remote teaching. What are those aspects that you're considering now for the next semester? In a sense, some students might be in a similar situation. Some students might be hopefully can come back to Liverpool. So what sort of things are you considering from a student's perspective as you're designing for next year?
I think the challenge is it's up in the air. Like James, the practical stuff is going to dictate everything else. And until we know when it's safe and appropriate to be able to get into the labs and how that's going to look, then that informs the other stuff. So we're trying to sort of prepare as much as we can. And I think the assessment stuff that we did online, we're like, oh, that was a bit scary to start with, but actually we did okay. So maybe we'll certainly take some things from it. And it's I think we've just been too scared about we need to make sure that everyone's got reliable technology. We've got to have this, and we've got to have and it's like, it's too dodgy, but it worked. So
that was going to be my sorry, James, go on.
No, it's fine. Just linking back to something Stuart said in the last session was in a way that the act of making the podcast is the most important thing. The actual content's kind of irrelevant. So from a perspective of what can we do online, a lot of the skills like planning experiments and can all be done, and all the skills that are around that it doesn't matter really what the chemistry is or what we're talking about, what they could do in the lab. It's all the planning aspect and the discussion and the group work. So that's the approach that I'm trying to take. Which so again, to come back to the point of Anna's, is everything in the lab is practical skills learning. All the other kind of, I hate the term softer skills, but all the other type of skills and design-based skills can come offline or online.
Great. Yeah. So in a sense, are you sensing anything from having reflected and what you're thinking now of anything that you might do less of or more of as a result of this period? I mean, in a sense, you've described it, but yeah, just any thoughts on that?
Group work for me.
Yeah, and could I say something? I think that we may probably do more smaller assessment because that's really important to keep people engaged and for them to feel that they are engaged. And I think it's a good in itself anyway, actually. The problem is how to do it in a way that isn't workload heavy. I mean, there are two approaches to online teaching. One is that you give the students everything as a kind of read this, think that, watch this, do this exercise. And then the actual teaching takes place with how students respond to that in assessment. So you have little and often assessment, and the real teaching takes place in the feedback on the assessment. And then there's another way of looking at it, which is that the real teaching takes place with what you're asking them to do, and the sessions and the things that they do together and collectively. And I think we're heading more towards the latter. But I do think we have to really think about how we design those activities so that they have some kind of assessment at the end of them, even if the teaching takes place through the doing of them rather than through the feedback. And so I think we're dividing everything up into much, much smaller chunks. And that's a lot of work, but I do think ultimately it leads to a better pedagogy, not least because each time it's asking students to do those things we've said are important, which is to think for themselves.
I mean, Stuart, nothing. I was gonna just link it to James. You said something about continuous assessment, and is this something that resonates? Is this something you're already doing in chemistry, for instance?
Yeah, particularly for lab-based courses, they're being assessed every week pretty much, and we have pre-lab assessments before they can come in. We just have to work with them more and be more rigorous in a way. We're quite rigorous anyway, but that would be a big, rather than that being a barrier to getting into the lab, that will be the learning activity itself. So yeah, this is kind of the plan, that we're going to have more shorter assessments, I think, in chemistry. Other than roughly knowing when that would occur, the specifics that Diana's been suggesting, we're still discussing.
Yeah.
So one of the things actually I want to be doing more, curiously, is a lot of thinking about what our pedagogy really was when we could be on campus and teach students, what it was we were doing and why we were doing it, which often we don't reflect on very much. We just teach because that's how we were taught and that's how everybody else teaches, and we assess in certain ways just because we've just kind of absorbed it by osmosis or something. And those things are quite hard to carry over into online learning, and we can have a debate about whether we should or not. But last week I did this kind of spontaneous Twitter poll because I saw this thing, somebody very senior in universities actually had said students don't want lectures anyway, we should bin them anyway. And I thought, no, I'm not sure that's right, actually. I think there are students who like lectures. So I did this poll, it got 500 responses, which is pretty good.
Wow.
If you've ever been to university, what were your wow moments at university? Where did they happen? Were they in lectures? Were they in seminars, small groups? Were they private study reading, or were they in sort of informal conversations in the bar or the cafe or whatever? And it's very interesting because the responses were pretty evenly split between lectures, seminars and private study, and the informal stuff with peers was smaller. But in the discussion there was a lot of talk about the interplay between those things. which is something we don't talk about. And importantly, all of those things happen in particular types of physical spaces, whether it is the bar, whether it is the seminar room, whether it's the library, the lecture hall. And so recreating those kind of environments online and then getting the interplay between them among students and staff is virtually impossible, actually. So if we want to retain some of that, okay, I mean, I can scaffold learning online, I can have lots of ongoing assessments, I can make it clear to the students what they need to know, when they're going to be tested, what they'll be tested on, what their progress is. But to get all of those other ingredients of higher education in is challenging. I haven't got the answer, but I'm thinking about it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I mean, I would just also want to bring in the chat that we're going on around reflecting, because I think you introduced a really interesting point about reflecting, and this gives us opportunity of what our pedagogy has been like and what we might be. So I think, Diana, you were nodding and on this.
Yeah, I'm actually running a workshop for my colleagues on Friday where what I want them to do is with something fun, you know, a cartoon or something, to feel the difference between being shown something and then told what to think about it, being shown something and then asked questions, and being shown something and then being given guided tasks, just so that my colleagues can feel the difference between those different ways of learning and moving towards more and more active learning. I don't know how well it will work, but it seemed to me that was the quickest way to get them to actually think about and reflect on how we teach, so that they can be a little bit more informed about thinking about how they plan what to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. I mean, as I realize that our time is soon up, and perhaps, I don't know whether as a closing thought, Stuart, I could take your idea that you were suggesting to reflect on our pedagogy, and perhaps can you add a final thought, snippets of your reflections on this as we are in this threshold space, in a sense? Would that be fair to ask you?
Well, I've got lots of reflections on it, but I'll just say one, because I'm curious about it. I've started to think a lot about the extent to which the way we all teach is shaped by our own experience of learning. So, I mean, we all learn differently and so on, but those of us who thought as a student that lectures were absolutely great and they loved, you know, particular lecturers, maybe we've carried that over into the way we teach and so on. And we probably need to really ask ourselves those questions a lot more if the ways that we learnt aren't possible, at least in the short term. We need to maybe, you know, expose ourselves to other forms of learning. I mean, I don't know how many of us have ever done an online course. Actually, it was for me when I did an online statistics course that, again, bulb moments, that's when I realized actually that there's great virtues to forms of online learning. And that's where I overcame my skepticism. But it was only because I took the plunge and did an online course that I realized. So maybe we just need to push ourselves outside of our comfort zones a little bit more.
That's brilliant. I guess that actually that's one of my top suggestions for people, is to do an online course before, you know, just because experiencing as a student, there's nothing better than being able to then have that knowledge. Okay, any other reflections?
Main thing I learned from doing online courses that I took into my teaching when I was teaching online for the Open University was nobody knows whether you're listening or not. Nobody knows whether you've gone away to do something else, make a cup of tea or something. And it's really hard not to go away and make a cup of tea unless it's really engaged and exciting what's happening online. So that was very much an experiential learning that completely affected how I teach when I teach online.
I mean, that's exactly what Anna said earlier about asking students to switch on the camera. So at least you have some non-verbal clues. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Diana. James or Anna, any final thoughts?
Well, I just hope we can continue these sorts of discussions as well, and things like the Learning and Teaching Conference. We're all learning right now, and we're all trying to figure out what works. We've got to, and sometimes you can get overtaken by your own, right, we've got to get this sorted, this needs doing, you know, and actually having the opportunity to go, hang on, is this the right thing to do? Is this the best way? What else is out there? Because like when I was saying about the eye animations earlier, I found out about that through the Learning and Teaching Conference. And it's brilliant. The students love it. You know, I love it. And so it's having those opportunities to kind of go, oh, I didn't know that existed. Oh, wow, we can do what? You know, so it's for us to keep learning.
Brilliant. And I haven't planted you at all. This was completely because our conference is coming up. So I'm sure we will advertise it in a link. Yeah, so thanks, Anna, for that. Okay, I think James has a final thoughts, or?
I guess we're all going to be engaged with our own CPD quite a lot over the next 3 months, I guess.
Quick. And I think I really like, Diana, your idea of exposing people, tutors, lecturers, so different ways of learning, and kind of links with Stuart, your idea about, you know, what do you know and how you've learned, and whether you can be challenged to experience other things. And I think your Twitter poll, which I also completed, does make that point very well, the results that people learn in different ways at different times and in different combinations. So I think that's so useful. I don't have any wisdom to add to your amazing contributions, apart from just saying I really, really enjoyed visiting your treasure islands, and I hope we can come together in I can't pronounce that word, someone help me, but the
archipelago
of islands, and have some really lots of lightbulb experiences with students and with each other as well. So thank you so much for your coming and contributing, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.